Welcome to Trash Pickins, where we unpack the most over-the-top, cringe-worthy, downright trashy movies together. Though this time, we're going to be unpacking a film that has a lot of notoriety for being abstract, avant-garde in the film genre, and that would be Eraserhead by David Lynch. We have all been fans of David Lynch for forever. We don't actually think it's trash, and when we heard of his passing, we thought that it would be a great opportunity to pay homage by actually spending some time picking it apart, revisiting it. So stick around as we unpack Trash Pickins. So stick around as we unpack Eraserhead. I'm Lisa.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Frank.
And we are excited to get pickin'.
You got your good things and I've got mine.
All right, so what is Eraserhead about? Eraserhead is a story of a young man named Henry who feels like his life is out of control at some level. He is involved with a woman named Mary. They have a baby before they're married. Her parents force them to get married, and they have to grow up quickly. In short, it's about a man who is not ready for parenthood, and in the end, it's not entirely clear what happens, but he's no longer really responsible for the baby in the same way. So we'll leave it at that. All right, Eraserhead has been analyzed by pretty much every film student. Everybody has a take, I'm sure, but let's share ours. So you both, what do you think about Eraserhead? What is the top line? What's the takeaway? What do you think of the film?
I used to really love this film, and I think like all of David Lynch's work has influenced mine. But I think rewatching it now feels a little different. I didn't dislike it, but the film felt like it was very personal to him. There was so much symbology in it that I was like, there's no way that that symbology can have the same meaning to everyone. And I think David Lynch acknowledges that clearly. This is why he's never revealed the meaning of the movie. He wants people to interpret it. But it felt like there was so much personal meaning, or there were so many symbols that had to be personal to David Lynch that it made me wonder why it is so revered. Because there's that sort of thing where like art has to be hard to understand, or it has to be abstract, or it has to be inaccessible for some reason in society, in the art field sometimes. And it really made me reflect on that a lot. I wonder if the imagery and the originality of like his aesthetic is actually what people enjoy, or if it's just so hard to decode because it's very personal to David Lynch himself that people confuse that with being convoluted and artsy and therefore pedestalized it. Maybe it's a mixture of both, but that's kind of what my reflections were this time when watching it.
I don't know. I didn't really like it. I didn't really dislike it. It was kind of grotesque, kind of unsettling, kind of annoying at times. I don't know. I don't think I've seen many David Lynch films prior to this. It was very heavy in the pauses. He very much set the cadence of the movie so that you were expecting the next word. You want somebody to just bust in and say something quickly and interact in a more natural pace. I get what it was for, and I understand why I was doing it, and it's like, oh, this is a very uncomfortable thing. How am I not going to be annoyed watching this uncomfortable scene that is like just a little bit longer than I really want it to be?
That's really interesting. I had a similar feeling. I think the first time I saw it was over 20 years ago in a theater, and watched it a few times after that. I felt so taken by it the last times I watched it so long ago, and now I can almost see it as like a relic and a seed of something that created a whole field and a whole career for David Lynch. And it's like I couldn't almost disaggregate those. As a film, I think I forgot at how grotesque some of the scenes were. I just completely had forgotten, or it didn't unsettle me in the same way that it did now. But overall, I also found myself a little bit more curious about the symbolism, like you're saying, and more desiring to sort of piece it together in a way that I think I didn't have the capacity to when I was younger, which is very interesting. So I'm kind of excited to unpack it today. So before we dive into some of these themes and symbolism that we've been talking about, Sarah, explain to us the synopsis. Like, what is the scene by scene? What is Eraserhead about?
Yeah, so just to like give a quick disclaimer, David Lynch wanted people to interpret it and have different meanings. So I am only going to recap the literal scenes, and then I think the three of us can analyze what it means. This is just a description of what we see versus what the movie is about, which I feel like you have to say in this case because it's a very abstract movie. We are introduced to our protagonist, Henry, and he is traversing through an urban industrial decay landscape to get to his apartment. Once he gets to his apartment, his seductive female neighbor informs him that his girlfriend has invited him to dinner.
Your girlfriend invited you to dinner.
Okay.
He goes to dinner at his girlfriend's house. We meet her strange family. And it is revealed that his girlfriend was pregnant and had a baby and he didn't know about it. Henry and his girlfriend Mary, I believe her name was, are quickly forced together to get married and take care of the baby. Mary moves into Henry's apartment and it is revealed that this baby is an alien monstrosity. But in the world of David Lynch, nobody seems to respond to it or really be too disturbed by it. But it's kind of disturbing.
Oh my God!
Mary attempts to take care of the baby and feed it and love it, but because I guess it's crying a lot and looks kind of creepy, she doesn't like it and she goes crazy, so she ends up leaving him to take care of the baby. Henry tries to take care of the baby, and then just a series of events happen in an abstract pattern. The baby gets sick and Henry has to give it medicine. Henry has a bunch of dreams about his radiator in his apartment where he projects the image of this weird woman living inside his radiator. His seductive neighbor comes over one night and sleeps with Henry. And then he also has an abstract dream where his brain is turned into an eraser. All of this culminates in the end where his seductive neighbor ends up sleeping with another man. And Henry gets very jealous about this, and his baby seems to mock him because of his jealousy. Henry snaps his baby. Those are just the literal scenes that we see in a nutshell. I skipped all the scenes of the dust in the air and the comets and the skipped describing all that because that's hard to describe that.
Well, that was a great synopsis, Sarah. I don't think we could have done it any other way. So we're going to do a thematic analysis today in the style of David Lynch, meaning that we don't really have a plan. We're going to address it as it comes in true abstract fashion. So, yeah.
I made a list of all the symbols that, at least in my film class, they pointed out as things important to talk about. So I could read them and then we could see if any of them spark interest.
Okay, go for it then. I won't interrupt. Yeah.
But I'll list them all first and then we can pick out whatever is interesting. Pipes. There's a lot of specific talk about pipes, and pipes actually break up a lot of the frames. The piles of dirt that are seen around his apartment, his cupboard that he puts his little grotesque worm in, the worm in a box, the comet/rock that we see as like sort of interludes between scenes. It looks kind of like an astral planet. We see that a lot. The man in the planet, which the guy at the beginning who's moving the levers, the empty mailbox, the lady in the radiator, and the brain as an eraser.
I have a couple things I wanted to start with, and then we can go to that list. The thing that I think really struck me this time in watching it is the fact that, in my mind, it's like very clearly associated with like abortion in a way that I didn't really acknowledge when I saw it when I was younger. When I saw it when I was younger, I saw the monster baby as an alien that meant nothing. It was gross, it was weird, it was funky, everything was surreal. But this time, it's like, it was just very, very obvious watching it again. And I think what was really fascinating to me was that when you watch it, you have a visceral reaction, which is the level of disgust that you would imagine this young couple having, that they have this responsibility, and like what postpartum depression may or may not be like. So I haven't experienced it. I don't know what that's like, but at least for the characters themselves, because they express not wanting to have this responsibility, not wanting to be thrust together, I feel like he did an amazing job, David Lynch, of making us feel the disgust that they must feel in terms of what they've had to contend with given this situation in their life. I don't know, like that just kind of jumped out to me. That was like a first impression. So I was just curious what you both felt about that.
I agree. Yeah, I think the two major themes, like just really simply, is abortion and fear of sex. Overwhelmingly, I feel, after watching it now, returning to it after all these years, is that the film is like self-hating. And that's why it feels wrong to pedestalize it as much as it has been. And like if you want to consider it like a cinematic masterpiece, that's fine. And if you want to enjoy the symbolism in his originality and the way he like does dialogue, like it's true, all of that is very unique. But like I said, when you actually look at what he's just literally presenting to you, it really feels like that he was ashamed of his own, like assuming this is personal to him, ashamed of his own sexuality, had issues with like sex and maybe having children and his role as a parent, and like there's just so much shame in it. And the fact that like the actor who played Henry was always directed to be like his art, like scared, constantly scared. Everything was upsetting. I was like,
yeah.
It says that David Lynch was 31 when he filmed this. I don't know when he had kids or got married, but my guess is that these are probably things he was thinking about. You know, it's clearly about, like Frank said, the consequences of intercourse and the responsibility afterwards, which I think can be iffy, but if that's what he wants to talk about, fine. It's possible that even despite the difficulty in decoding this, maybe the statement David Lynch was saying is just kind of weird. Even beyond the weirdness of the film, because I'm like, this seems oddly moralizing. If these symbols are just supposed to be physical representations of guilt, shame, whatever, that's fine. But it's just, that's a weird thing. I was like, I don't necessarily feel that way. Some people can, you know, but that's why I think maybe those specific messages might be lost in the sort of surrealism of it. And I think I'm happy I don't know it, because I have a feeling that whatever he was experiencing is not something that is my experience, and it would maybe ruin it for me. If I understood his beliefs about what a woman's role is and what it means to take care of a child and abortion. I don't really want to know David Lynch's opinions about those things.
Yeah, because it seemed, I mean, like, it's hard to disaggregate the art from yourself, and like he could have been imagining something or been inspired by something else and manifested it, but it seemed so visceral and so disturbing that to get to that level, I feel like it was channeled from some level of familiarity, you know? So I feel like it was pretty obvious in this film, though, based upon what we're saying, at some level. I mean, we'll never fully know, but yeah. The symbol of the monster baby in various spaces I thought was really fascinating. So I kind of wanted to unpack that a little bit as well. He receives a small envelope that he always wants to go down and see if he got in his mailbox, and he opens it and it's like a tiny version of the monster baby. And then when he's feeling lustful towards his seductive neighbor for a moment, she's looking at him, his head turns into like a monster baby. So there's all this element of that actually being like a physical manifestation of his lust that he feels like ashamed of, but he's also wants to like see and experience and like keep hidden from other people as well. So that's another big thing that jumped out in watching it again that I wanted to highlight. I don't know, Frank, did those themes jump out to you as well?
I actually, when I didn't know what this movie was, like years ago, I didn't know. And I thought Eraserhead was like a Dick Tracy villain. I had to look it up and see. Turns out it's not, but that's fine. And I was like, oh, me knocking my damn headphones out because I'm talking too much with my hands. I did think it was a Dick Tracy film. I was like, oh, Eraserhead, it must be like a prequel to Dick Tracy movie or something. So I was surprised to see that there was no organized crime and private investigators in the movie. But other than that, yeah, it was clearly a lot of abortion references and the bleak nature of existence in that world. It just continuously gets worse throughout the movie. Like everything just gets harder and darker and more gory and bloody and foamy for some reason. I don't know why that happened. But yeah, it was not fun.
And actually, the last sort of thing that jumped out that I wanted to point out, just as we look over some large themes, was, right, the lady in the radiator. And I feel like there was sometime I read something about him saying there was always like a radiator whistling in some apartment that he lived in, and that he would sort of lean into it and be taken away and imagine there was a woman singing in the radiator. And so that like really jumps out as it's so interesting as this purity, like somehow this imagined woman represents purity, and so much so that when he's having these pure feelings of like these sexual desires as represented by tiny word monster babies that fall from the sky when she's singing, she is the one who's able to smash them. So he kind of feels like he's helpless, and he's almost in like a religious way handing over his shame to her to sort of destroy. And even at the end of the film, when all is said and done, he ends up like in her embrace. So he kind of goes into this dissociated state as he's like experiencing like rage and frustration and shame and ideations of violence and all of that. And she just takes it all away in this made up world and space in his head.
That scene with the lady dancing on stage, like the chubby cheek lady, with like singing about how nice heaven is, and like you can have your good things and I can have mine, and I was like, and then she starts squishing the like little worms on stage. Yeah, that was. I mean,
Agreed. Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because, and I wasn't meaning to critique his films after he's passed, but the vibe I got from her being this sort of escapist fantasy for him, like if you look at the three women, you have his wife who is like hysterical and can't handle having this monster baby, and she's like erratic, and she's like biting her teeth, and she's like foaming at her mouth and like twitching, like all. And then you have like the woman who lives across the hall from him, who is just like this evil seductress. Like he didn't make her evil, but the way she like comes out of the darkness, and she's always looking from like the top of her, it's very like succubus feelings.
Yeah. And she at night comes in and wants to, exactly along the lines of the succubus, that's when she wants to come in at night to his apartment.
And then you have the lady in the radiator, who's like this almost like childlike innocent woman who's like performing for whoever's watching her, but her performance is like really lame and simple, where she's just like stepping around on stage, like akin to a performance like a child would do. Yeah, there's something really, to me, gross. It's a male perspective. And when you look at all three of those women, I'm just like, there's undertones of sexism in all of it. And I was just didn't like that in this. Like, I don't know. That's what I was saying this to you about Blue Velvet. I haven't wanted to rewatch it because I just have a feeling I'm going to discover something about his perspective on women that wasn't intentional and was just a reflection of the times. And I just didn't like the lady in the radiator being this like escapist, cutesy, like innocent whatever from a temptress woman and a hysterical woman. It just, all of those are like stereotypes that are very harmful. All three of them.
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm thinking back to the actual mother as well, too, who's like a little bit more of a caricature. I feel like those characters are like a caricature of what you would imagine when you visit a parent's house, but we can get to that after. But no, I agree, Sarah. I think that like, I mean, I'm a David Lynch fan. I'm not a diehard David Lynch fan. I've appreciated it. So I I don't know what everybody says and how they feel, but I mean, I think, like you're saying, those themes are blatantly obvious. It doesn't detract from his genius as a filmmaker and as this surrealist world building that he does at all. But it's just kind of like of note, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it upset me because, like, he is seen, like you said, as a cinematic genius, and these films are just, because they're so hard to decode, when you blindly pedestalize things like this, you're accidentally also promoting maybe these undertones that we're talking about that could be problematic. And I just don't trust that a lot of people who claim to really love his work are actually looking at it critically, you know? And that's why I think it's important to like have podcasts like this, because even though like he's still like one of my favorite directors, I felt a little disappointed returning to it, seeing that, but it didn't, like you said, it doesn't make me dislike his directorial style or his timing or the actors he chooses or anything like that. But I just, you know, I was like, oh, I have to be careful not to internalize any of these things while also agreeing with his cinematography, for example.
Yeah, I couldn't stand The Lady in the Radiator ever. Like before, when I was younger watching it, now I had like zero patience for the routines. Obviously she's disturbing, the undertones of purity and pedestalizing he does to her and all of his desires. But like, it's like weird because he just like lays on the edge of the bed and just like looks at the radiator, you know? So it's like, it's hard to not see it that way. All right. Okay, pipes. This also reminds me of Mary's father, who's like, I'm a pipe fitter. Like, I have to say, he's like my favorite character in the whole movie. That he's like so intense, and he's like, look at my knees, I'm always down to my knees. And then like, then the mother gets up and has to like push him away and quiet him down. And he's just like the quintessential, like spaced out in the sense that he doesn't really know what's going on, like father, you know, or parent. I feel like they did such a good job of creating an absurd version, surreal version of that character, even down to the like, oh, I hurt my arm, like back in the day kind of thing, and the smile on his face. Anyway, so he's the pipe fitter, which I thought was interesting in terms of like, at least leading into this question of the symbolism of the pipes, which I don't have an answer on, but I did want to mention that I liked that. I feel like this is like a quiz with these symbols, and some of them I really have no clue. I don't know about the pipes necessarily. I don't know, Frank, you were really taken by the landscape, and does anything jump out to you in terms of associations or like the pipes and the humming and how they're everywhere?
I think the pipes are just like a part of that kind of industrial landscape that's created. I don't know what they really do in the movie other than maybe could be like the source of the noise that's always there, like that like humming that's always going on, like it goes through the radiator obviously, but there's like always some level of a buzz going through there. I don't know why having her father be the guy who like, oh, I put all the pipes in the city is like a thing, because he seems like such an unusual character for the movie. Like he stands out as being different from all the other characters that we meet, but different and then also super weird too. So
the other one I was curious what you guys thought about were the piles of dirt around the apartment. Yeah, there was on his dresser, there on his nightstand, and under the radiator. And I don't remember this, but in my film class, I remember them saying how the piles of dirt changed in size throughout the movie. I didn't pay attention to that this time, but I don't know. I remember them analyzing the size of the piles as having meaning. I don't know.
I think they were slightly different types. I thought that it almost looked like hair or like pine needles or like mulch, and then the one next to the bed was more fine silt dirt that had the little fake the dead tree coming out of it. And related, like there was that weird thing where he opens the top drawer and there's like a pot of water in it that he throws something in and he closes it up. Like, to me, like when I see that stuff, I just think it's like incidental symbolism. Like it's sort of like, it's not going to make or break the film. Like I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe every level of analysis is like this deeply complex thing. But I was just like, it's just weird. It's filthy. It's dirty. It's weird. Nothing grows here. It's dead and, you know, sad. There's no living thing anywhere in the film. It's just the remains of living things. So I'm not the one to ask, I guess, about that level of analysis.
Yeah, I didn't look at it in such a pessimistic way. I actually saw the dirt as like the only natural thing in the entire movie, because it was concrete and pipes and like demon babies and all this crazy stuff. And literally there's like that plant that's dead, and dirt is the only thing that is like a connection to the natural world that's in the entire movie. outside of the chicken that they try to eat that turns out to be alive and gushing in blood and all that stuff. So that wasn't even that. It was just the dirt. And I feel like having it in the room was like, and if the piles were getting bigger, I didn't see it, but I kind of wonder if it was like the character trying to be like pulled back to a natural existence, to something that like not having the baby and getting back to his normal life would be kind of a thing like that. That's like the optimistic thing. Otherwise, yeah, it's just accumulating filth. But it didn't seem like that because it was neat piles, right? Even outside, it was neatly piles of dirt that he's playing around with. Kind of before everything happens, kind of this innocent, like returning home, playing in the dirt, playing in the puddles thing. So I kind of feel like it was more of a call to that.
Yeah, that's how I took it as well. It was a symbol that kind of confused me because, like Frank said, it was the only like organic substance, because everything else is like industrial pipe, steam, steel, garbage, you know? So when you actually see the dirt, it feels like, oh, this is nature. But I was a little confused by it because I think the one on his nightstand has like a dead tree branch in it. So I was like, is this an example of decay, or is it a potential for growth? I don't know. I wasn't sure if that was it. It felt like a slightly confused symbol to me personally, but I guess we can all assume that David Lynch is masterful and actually has a very specific reason for it.
I liked the I liked the eraser part. I thought was really bizarre. And I was like, okay, because the whole movie I'm thinking, what the hell is an eraser head? What does that even mean? Like, is it because the hair on the top of his head looks like those old chalkboard erasers? You know, I'm trying to be really literal with it. And then he's even more literal. And it's like, oh no, human brains are what erasers are made from. Okay, I guess that's fine. Now I get it. That whole scene with the kid grabbing the head and bringing it to this like factory where he like tests it to see if it's a good enough eraser or something. Really weird. Really weird, but I like it. It kind of is like, it feels like a very artsy thing to do, where it's like the repression of creativity and the undoing of creation and that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, well, that scene could have just been like a short, and it would have had the same impact as the whole movie, is my guess. Like that would have been just 5 minutes or however long it actually is, and people would have been like, oh yeah, that's a really artistic little short film. Cool.
Yeah, I think that like you're saying with the eraser, like at least in terms of the symbolism that we were talking about before, it's almost like, again, that shame is like, his head is worth nothing. It needs to be like sort of swept clean. It needs to be blank. It's like, it's either stupid because he doesn't trust what his brain is telling him to do, or like, you know, it's not good enough and it needs to be used to like erase the errors of the past, like things like that, you know, kind of come up for me when I think about that element of the film.
You see, this is why it's good. David Lynch would love this, because I took it actually as it's specific to Henry's brain, and it's a statement that Henry is good at repressing. And the reason that it's an eraser is because an eraser, like, gets rid of. It undoes the marks you've made, so it no longer existed and you've forgotten. I saw it as a symbol of forgetting. Because he literally makes a mark in the paper and then he erases it like it was never there in the first place. So I thought it was saying that the best thing brains can do, or maybe not the best, but what brains are good at are forgetting, repressing. And I mean, I took it as repression because the whole movie he's like ashamed of his sexuality or something.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That actually makes a ton of sense. I think what I was thinking is like along those lines, but not, yours is more on the nose and it makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't take it as because at this point I've realized I'm in the middle of an RD flick, right? And everything is symbolism and weird. And I didn't take it as like his brain specifically was eraser, because clearly this kid goes around and finds decapitated heads and gets paid for bringing them to this guy. So I looked at it as more of a broader kind of like reflection on humanity and what we think we're so special about, and really just eraser heads. We're all eraser heads.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised. I know that David Lynch was like very spiritual. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a belief that like, you know, brains keep you from your potential and we must overcome the biological need to repress, you know?
Like humans think they're so special and this brain is what gives us our special creativity and everything. And it's just eraser. It's just rubber. That's all.
The only other one I was curious about your guys' opinion was the comet/planet, because we never saw it in the context of anything. It was always like the surface of it. And then we saw the man with the levers who's assumed to somehow be maybe inside of it or a part of it or connected to it, but there was no environmental context. So it was kind of difficult to, I don't know, analyze that one, I thought.
My first thought, because I was in this kind of mindset watching it, and I was trying to think, like, back in the 70s, what they would use to film these things with. And for some reason, it just looked like a chocolate munchkin to me, like, spinning through space. And I was like, you know what? I bet that would work, because, like, if all black and white, it would look like a small dirt planet hurtling around. You just kind of rotate it as it's coming through. But that has absolutely nothing to do with the movie. That was just a thing that I was thinking in my head. I feel like it is not supposed to be necessarily in his head. My thought was that it was either like a representation of like God or the devil or something. The guy pulling the levers, controlling everything, creating these like demon babies. Or it looks like, I thought at the beginning of the movie, you see like the guy's head like floating around the munchkin, and then like the little baby comes out of him, like out of his mouth, and goes up to the planet. So it kind of felt like when she's singing about heaven, and then you go back to the beginning and see this like little spirit baby going back to that hole, that planet, that it was kind of like tying that into it being heaven, or it being God pulling the levers and pulling the strings on everything.
Yeah, I had a similar take on it. He opened his mouth, Henry's head sideways, over that, like overlaid over the planet, opens his mouth, lever pulls, monster baby comes out. And to me, I was like, oh, he's orgasming. Like, that was like my thought. And then like you said, Frank, it goes toward like the whole, it has like a whole like sort of birth canal thing. There's like the splashing of like the liquids, and the liquid water is used later as a symbol when he's like having sex with the seductress lady. And then it falls into like a puddle. There's all that like liquid organic matter around like that quote birth of this thing. And so that's why in my mind it was like, yeah, it's probably what he imagines is whatever is out there that is giving him these thoughts to want to be lustful and have sex. That is what causes him to have that monster baby. And it's completely out of his control. It's somewhere else in like a planet or a comet flying overhead. And that's why you have to erase your mind, because you don't want to have that mind control from something else. That's like kind of how I interpreted it, like very similar to you, Frank.
I know. Well, that's why I said there's so much shame in this movie, and that's why I wonder if the sort of abstract nature of it is obscuring the messages he's saying. Like, if what we're saying is the intended message, imagine it being literal. Everyone would be like, what the fuck? You're making a movie like that's... I mean, it's fine. People can explore their shame. If it's a personal journey, it's fine. But if it's like something you believe and it's like an agenda you're pushing, I don't really know if he believes everyone should like reel in their sexual desires, or if he's saying, I felt that way and it was something I had to work through. That's fine, you know, but it's a weird thing. And I think the abstraction makes it hard for people to acknowledge what's being talked about. And that's why I'm like, this is a little questionable.
Yeah. Well, in watching it, I actually felt like, okay, so I don't know, again, whatever, but I felt like bad for David Lynch making this at that age, because I was like, oh my gosh, like it feels like, I don't think it's moralizing, but I think it is revealing his hand. And like that experience would elicit such grotesque imagery and such fear and such shame. It's just like, wow, like that's a very different experience that I don't relate with, but I feel like that's gotta be a terrible place to be in your head with all that, you know? And it just, I felt bad. Yeah, I felt really bad. Like, I don't know.
That's why I said it feels inappropriate that people are like, Eraserhead's my favorite film, and I have a tattoo of Henry, and it's fine. He shared it with us. He's open to people enjoying it, but still, I feel like it's personal, and you have to just kind of let it still be his. That's how I feel. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, that reminds me, Sarah, I have a question, because it's about art school and how it was interpreted. So, Sarah, you're mentioning that like people are really into this film. I mean, I had learned about it from like art school kids. It was like on the radar of films you needed to watch, along with like Fellini and all these other things, right? But like, what is it that they like so much about it? Like, from what you saw, actually having taken a class about David Lynch films, like what draws them to it? What was exciting to them about it?
Sure. I have a feeling that the reason this class that I took existed is because I went to the same college that David Lynch went to. So it might just be that they had that because, you know, he's a big name. David Lynch went here. But at least the way they did talk about it was that he kind of created this world and this aesthetic that was like so original and so specific just to him. And it was just laced with layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. And that's just, I guess, worthy of praise in the mind of film critics. I don't know, you know, that at least everything we talked about was simple. Everything was simple. Like I said, they were analyzing the size of the dirt, and it was like, I don't know if he actually thought about that, but like, even if he didn't think about it, I guess as a film critic, you could do that and have fun with it. But to me, it felt, I don't know, unnecessary.
Yeah. So it was like a puzzle. It was basically like, what are the layers of meaning? And let's like reason it out and imagine and like whatever we want this to be, it could be. Okay.
They also did give like a history about him, like I think some interesting things. I should have looked this up before recording. But I think that he lived on set. Like this was his first film, so I think he filmed it and then like ran out of money or something. So I remember them talking about how he had to live in the bedroom where they were filming it because he actually didn't have a place to live, and he like lived with the baby prop and like slept in that bed, and so that's why it was so like all encompassing. So things like that were interesting to learn, but like in this day and age, you can just Google any of that, you know what I mean? But
yeah, because I was just wondering, I mean, off the top of my head, I feel like a lot of times these films, you know, we always have to think about the context and it being like the first of its kind and the first time that one would do a shoot like this or this level of surrealism in this way, in and of itself, creating that world can just sort of catapult someone because it's like it is like literally the start of a genre, and he created a genre, really influenced so many. So
I'm like, there's so many filmmakers out there that I feel like he is seen as like a surrealist filmmaker in the world of Hollywood, you know, because like Mulholland Drive has like big name actors in it, like Naomi Watts is in it. But I'm like, in terms of surrealist film, there's so much crazy shit out there. Like, do you know what I mean? I feel like it's that somehow he's a weirdo that got into Hollywood, you know, and that's why he seems to be like the head of it, because like his films were in theaters, you know, it wasn't just like all art house forever.
That makes sense. He moved in that direction too, right? And he had a lot of critique of Hollywood culture and a lot of that in his films.
The last thing I wanted to ask you both is if you felt like the abstract nature and the figurative way that things were filmed is necessary for this story and for these themes. What was the reason that this was abstract and figurative, other than that's just his style? You could tell the same story in 1,000 different ways. Did it have to be this abstract? I'm curious to know if the abstraction is why people like it, regardless of the meaning of the movie. Like, you know? I know it's how people identify the film, but like if you step back at it and you're like, was it needed?
I think that he is a surrealist filmmaker. This was like as they said online, a horror, like a body horror film, which is maybe a genre I'm not aware of. And then this is just the topic that he chose. Like, I don't think that he really needed to tell this story and was trying to find the best vehicle. I think this was his breakout film, like showcasing elements of his filmmaking that he would refine and bring to the screen time and again throughout the decades to come. And I just think that this just happened to be what he was working through as he was starting his film career.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think the sense I got from people who just like we were talking about before, it's just so critically acclaimed, they seem to imply that the technique, you know, the artsy technique that he used to film it and the sort of subject matter are married perfectly. In my mind, I agree with you, Lisa. I don't think that this style was required to talk about that story. It just feels like that's what he chose to do. But I feel like part of the reason people like it is because they act like those two things are perfect in this sense. But that's why I was curious about your opinions.
The only thing I'll give it is, like I said at the very beginning when we discussed this, which is that the level of disgust you feel as an audience member is akin to what I would imagine those characters feel being in that situation. I think that is genius. And I think in that sense, it is perfectly matched. But is that so essential to the entire film? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So...
Are we ready for comments? I only have 2. Okay. So I just picked 2. I picked a really bad one and a really good one. There's a million comments out there. A lot of them are really long and as boring to read as anything. So this is a 1 out of 10. So this is the bad one, obviously. The poorest excuse for a movie in cinematic history. I couldn't find anything more dramatic. I legitimately don't know how anyone could sit through this and say, yeah, this was amazing. Like, are you serious? This was pretentious, forced, boring, and repetitive. Dialogue sucks, camera work sucks, the forced making you think deeply agenda doesn't work because there is no story. Complete and utter bore. Anyone who says they understood or liked this movie is lying. I wish I could give it negative 50 stars. Do not waste your time on this trash. So somebody did call it trash.
They call it trash.
Some of these are like from the early 2000s. So this is a 10 out of 10. This is a good one. This is the exact opposite of the first one. The most original film ever made, a masterpiece. Let's say it right here and now, David Lynch is a genius. I don't care if you love him or hate him, you can't take away that simple fact. Eraserhead is his masterpiece, the most original and personal film ever created by any filmmaker. It's a statement. It's as far from the forgettable fluff of mainstream Hollywood as you can get, and as weird as it is, it strikes a chord deep in the human psyche. I don't think anyone could experience this film without being deeply moved. This beautiful industrial nightmare comes as close to depicting a fever dream as any film ever could or ever will. David Lynch pulled out all the stops to make Eraserhead as perfect as any film can be, and it shows. It is a great work of art in its own right. The characters and setting are unforgettable and are as strange as they are familiar. The story is slow moving, but steadily builds with the fury of a small hurricane. Okay. The film walks a tightrope somewhere between the reality of the world we know and someplace else. Where that is, only David Lynch knows for sure. Lynch is a fine example of a filmmaker who isn't afraid to take huge risks. That's how masterpieces are made. Eraserhead is the proof.
You see, I'm so glad. Exactly. I'm so glad you read that, Frank, because that was my entire experience in film school. Like, right there, that is how everybody talks about him. And while he does make great films, it really feels like that. For some reason, art people, there's an agenda with like wannabe artists or people who are on the journey to making it as an artist that they feel the need to like be a simp to like these masters. Where they're just like, you're the greatest, you're the best, you're and they just say this like insane shit. Like saying that was the most personal film ever made. I'm like, what? What about like the millions of other artists that have lived in the world that you haven't seen? Like that is a crazy thing that's just rude to even yourself. Like, you know, so anyway, that makes me angry because I'm like, he's great, but like, don't go to that level. Like,
I agree. I feel like there was no substance to that review. It was just fanboying or fangirling. And it was just like, the characters are great. The beautiful industrial wasteland. And that was like it. So they're basically reacting to the context. That's all.
I'm glad I could pick some inflammatory comments to read.
Yeah, no, that was good. That incited rage in me. And it's weird because David Lynch is one of my favorite filmmakers, but like I hate that review. It's just what I hate about artists is that if you can be either like a mean critic or you can like the most obscure, hard to understand thing, it somehow is like a quick pipeline to elevating yourself as an artist. And to me, that's such bullshit. You know, you have to align yourself with absurdity or, I don't know, things that are hard to understand in order to prove your own worth. Like, it just drives me crazy. And I feel that in that review.
I feel like, I don't know if this is like just like, if this is international, if this is just US based stuff or whatever, but like, I do feel like there's like a constant striving in these fields to be the best. And like, how you be the best is like very weird. Like, so I'm from academia. And so being the best in academia is having the most obscure, unique take on something. And in some ways, it's like you see that again, like here in the film world, right? Like, oh, this is obscure. Oh, are you smart enough to figure this out? Where it's like, it's so cerebral. It's like, that's not all that art needs to be. It's, you know, like...
Yeah, actually, I think, Lisa, you just made me realize what I was trying to say. When things are not literal in art, they're somehow better and elevated. Because I think, like, the first review you said, Frank, it said, like, forcing you to think deeply. And there's this idea that if something is not literal, you therefore have to think more, and you have to think deeper, which will therefore force you to go into a deeper place emotionally, which is the goal of art, is to just be emotional. And all of that, to me, is such a shallow perception of what art is. Like, it's fine. Think deep, feel emotions. It's great, but you don't need to necessarily be figurative or metaphorical, and you also don't need to be reality TV either. Like, you know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of things you can do. Like,
that's really interesting. Exactly, because basically what they're saying is that in that case, for art to be good, it needs to actually exist in the realm of the archetypal, because the archetypal supersedes everything and touches you deeply psychologically and all this and that. Well, hey, what about the Hollywood hero's journey, right? That is the most like formulaic thing, but it actually reflects deeply. So it's a specific instance in the literal that is like translated in your mind into the figurative to supersede, such that any story is actually able to touch anyone, anywhere in the world. And to me, that's actually probably more powerful than the completely obscure with the specific reference that makes no sense to you individually, but unless you're sort of like a heady art type that is in this world and loves it.
I agree. I feel like that the idea that artwork needs to be inaccessible is for low-minded artists. That's what I think. And it doesn't mean that, like, David Lynch's work is bad. Like I said, it's very personal. And to me, it's great, but it shouldn't be this, like, I don't know, leader in thought of everyone needs to be this. And like, I bet to him, all of that was irrelevant because he's so in his own world and he's such a weirdo. You know what I mean? And I don't have any issue with him. It's just how everybody reacted to it and to create this cult craziness and just, it's weird. I feel like I'm pro-trash right now. I'm like anti-art and I'm pro-trash, but
I know, I feel the same.
But it's like, I don't like extremes. I don't like trash. I think trash is harmful, but I also hate people who just think being like crazy, absurdist, like obscure art, it somehow makes you better and more in tune with humanity. Like both of them are horrible.
Yeah, that take, exactly. All right, so that's a really great way to sort of, I think, end our discussion of Eraserhead. It is in itself a super unique, like, time capsule from the life of David Lynch, has had an outsized impact on filmmaking, on film students, and on the art world and the desirability to be obscure for decades to come. And, you know, it actually has some potentially problematic themes if we look at it for what it is as opposed to all the packaging that is so genius. So yeah, we hope that you enjoyed this analysis, and if you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please do, and stick around because we're going to be returning to the trash and getting knee deep in all the trashy stuff that's out there in the episodes to come.
Mm-hmm. And also, we hope that everything is fine in heaven with David Lynch. To reference the lady in the radiator, right?
Oh, yeah. And we should say for sure, thank you, David Lynch, for some amazing media. You will be missed.